to stream today. And for all intents and purposes, that's true. But it's a bit of a weird situation. I don't have the time I would want to have to do a stream, which is I like to stream for about an hour. Sometimes I run over, and then I still have some bumper time to do other things if I have to prep for work stuff, whatnot. I don't have that time. I did find another comment, which is why I named this stream responding to comments, but really it's one. And I wanted to respond to it. I wanted to do a video on it. I just, instead of typing up something really long and going through that rigmarole, I just thought, you know what, I'll record a response to it. So I wanted to do that, but I also didn't want to spend the time editing it, even though my editing is fairly minimal these days. I thought, I don't really want to go through and do the trouble editing it. I don't have time today, and yeah, I know I could post it tomorrow, but I like to sometimes strike while the iron is hot. If I wait, maybe my line of thinking will fade from my brain, or other things will come up, and I just won't get around to it. So I wanted to kind of get to that. So I thought, why not try this vertical on my phone thing? See what comes of it. It's a new feature on YouTube. I don't know if it's kind of I don't want to say a fad, but maybe it's a fad. I'm not sure. We'll see. Maybe it'll reach some folks who don't see the normal streams. Maybe it won't. I don't know. We're talking about, so just for some context, in case you're someone who hasn't caught streams of mine, as my chair is sinking beneath me, which is why I'm going down in the frame. I did a video or a stream on running. I gotta fix that, otherwise it's gonna drive me nuts. There we go. Okay, I did a stream earlier in the week, was it, on dungeon crawling, running a dungeon crawl in old school essentials. It is a topic that seems to give folks a lot of trouble, and I don't mean to keep harping on this or throwing shade at old school essentials. Old school essentials is a great reference. However, it isn't a great teaching book. I don't really think it pretends to be. It's not. But I think what's happened is Old School Essentials has been so successful with all its Kickstarters and just the way it has become kind of the de facto standard, at least in terms of retro clones, especially for the ones that are going retro cloning the basic and expert set from 1981. It's become kind of the de facto standard. A lot of folks who are coming in new to the OSR scene, or even I think some of them maybe just role-playing games in general, end up with OSE as their default. But when you read OSE, or when they read OSE, they don't have backgrounds in any of these games. They're not somebody, for me, I had these games when I was a kid, played with them, kind of grew up with them, moved on, came back, and when I got OSE, it's very familiar to me because I already had this background in the game. And even though I had to re-remember stuff, I still have to re-remember stuff and look at things again. It acts as that reference for me. Though, to be fair, if you've watched any of my videos, I always just go back to Basic Expert because I have those books still. If you're new and you go straight to Old School Essentials, it could be a struggle. And not because anything's wrong with Old School Essentials per se, but just they're Old School Essentials per se. It's just that they're not, it's reference material. It's written in a very concise way, though I feel like sometimes some of the clarity is missing, but really what's missing is all the context examples. I've said this a number of times, but I don't know who's watching, so I'm kind of saying it again. When I went through the combat example, I got some great comments from folks, really in-depth stuff, which is good. I think I just want to say kind of off the bat, the angle that I'm coming from with that particular stream is I'm targeting towards folks who are basically coming at it new. I'm not trying to show people how to hack the system, and I'm not recommending people hack the system, because I feel fairly strongly that play the system, try the system out runs, and then hack it wherever you find it falls short. So if you run Old School Essentials or Basic Expert by the book, you notice places in their rules or just procedures, mechanics that fall short for you and the kind of game that you want to run, then you go through and hack it up to make it fit. What I find too often is folks just want to hack it from the get-go, or they're looking for house rules or looking for things, and that's fine, but you don't know, you just get a house rule from out of nowhere. You don't know who did it for what reason, and if that's really going to solve the things that are going to be issues or potential sore spots for you. That's going to be very personal. There are probably a few things that have some kind of universality, but a lot of stuff is going to be kind of personal. Some people are going to like this, some people are going to like that, and all these different house rules and different procedures are going to be subject to that. And so I think learn the rules. So when folks responding to stuff from the stream saying, oh, hey, they should go into all these different books and get all these different things, or go into AD&D or go into OD&D, and yeah, that stuff's great, but it's for the people I'm trying to reach. It's way too early in the process. The worst thing you want to hear as a GM when you've got like, oh, I've got old school essentials, maybe I kickstarted and I got these big books, is somebody saying, now go buy these 8 other books. Let folks get used to the system, and then they will come out and they'll say, hey, I am dissatisfied with this, that, or I'm dissatisfied with the way light works. I'm dissatisfied with the way we got into running. Running works, and I want to fix it. And then we can come back and fix it. So as much as I love people coming in, and look, I'm fine with it, but because I've done this a long time, and I'm very comfortable with it. But just keep in mind that when I'm telling folks, or I'm looking at things and saying how the rules are, what the rules say, it's not that I necessarily agree with every rule, but I'm trying to show people how to do it, by the book, so to speak. And so commenting that, well, they should just go off book, I let them get the book, let people get a handle on the book first, then they can get off the book and do whatever they want. So now, let's see, his name here, Reverence_Pavan, sent a really, and it comes up in different ways. It's weird. If I look at it in one screen, it gives me Ian Borchardt. If I look at it another way, it gives me, I guess that's his name versus his handle, maybe. In any case, a really nice long comment about running. So one of the things we looked at yesterday, I think I put a short video up, was I looked back at running. Someone had put a question about running in the in Old School Essentials. And just, I apologize, I see lots of comments coming. This is all on my phone. I'm brand new to it, so it's not like I usually have it on screen where I can easily see chat. So I might scroll through comments kind of when I'm finished, but apologies if I don't get to everybody in the time. But I appreciate folks who are in here and chatting away. So Ian, not a fan of what I talked about yesterday in running, and that is the fact that you could kind of run full speed, so to speak, do something, turn, run full speed, so to speak, and do it. Now, first of all, keep in mind, this is not necessarily how I would most want to run the game ideally, but when looking at the rules, what do the rules say? The rules don't say it can't be done. The rules do say that if you're in melee and you move more than a third of your speed or half of your speed, whatever, then you are subject to certain things. Of course, if you're not in melee, you don't have to worry about that. And that it does say that, hey, you can move this much or you can run this much. The funny thing about it is that looking at the rules, they put these limits in about how far you can run before you tire and you start taking on penalties. And it's given in rounds. And this is where you can have some interesting fun. I've mentioned before about the time and turns. We have these mechanics, rounds in combat, turns when you're exploring, and how that translates into actual time. And the problem sometimes happens is that when you look at how much time they say a turn is, that can be a trouble. It can not compute for people. So you say you can move 120 feet in a turn. You say, okay, great. How long is a turn? 10 minutes. Whoa, that seems really slow. And so people want to monkey with it. And I said before, don't worry so much about the time part. Just worry about the turns. Keep the turns. When they're looking at their calculations for running, they say 30 rounds, I think, which they mean for about 5 minutes, half a turn. That you can run half a turn, which would seem to be reasonable, 5 minutes. But when you look at it in combat sense, you think you're going to be able to run for 30 turns. That's an eternity. I can't even think of any combats I can ever remember, even the most epic ones, that if I counted out the amount of turns we took, it was 30. Even in 4th edition, where I felt like, when at least the way we were playing it, some combats seemed to take forever. I don't even think we got near 30 turns. So in terms of how long you can keep up running every round, it's practically forever. In an absolute sense, it's only 5 minutes. In terms of what's happening in a combat round, you could just probably run. It feels like you could probably run all day. All that aside, Ian mentions about, hey, this idea of running, turning, and firing, right? I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's quite long, But he says, not a fan of this idea unless you're on a horse and trained in taking the Parthian shot, which is when the horsemen could essentially turn around in the saddle and fire arrows. Or I shouldn't say fire, I guess loose arrows. Especially if facing is at all important in your game, would you really want to keep turning your back on the enemy? And then turning back, reacquiring the enemy in your sight, reloading, drawing, and firing. He's coming at it from a very wargamey perspective, right? This, how can you do this? But granted, and I know D&D, wargaming roots, right? And BX is not exactly, right, old school essentials to BX, you're going 1981, not that far removed, less than 10 years removed from the white box. I get it. However, I think I'm going to go with a tongue-in-cheek answer first, right? Who's to say fighters can't do the Parthian shot? Fighters in D&D are proficient with every weapon in the world. There's no weapon they don't pick up and know how to use. So if you say, well, they don't know the Parthian shot, how do you know? I mean, well, one, where are the Parthians in your game? And who's to say that fighters can't do Parthian shots on foot? Because just from a standpoint, if we're going, that's where the problem with bringing real world logic, right? Soldiers in a particular army aren't proficient with every weapon in the world. Go get some guy in the army who's a sharpshooter, hand him a scimitar. He's not going to be proficient at it. He's a sharpshooter. But in D&D, you could have a fighter who's been using a two-handed sword for all their adventures, and then you hand them a polearm, a funky Gygaxian, glaive guisarme polearm, and they're just going to go to town. No penalty on it. So when you say, like, well, the Parthian shot, like, well, who's to say they can't use the Parthian shot? We don't know. Now, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? But, and yes, I do agree, right? Who wants to turn their back on the enemy, run, and then turn? But at the same time, and if I did a video, I was going to post this in there. This is, to me, is more like The Princess Bride with Count Rugen is running away from Inigo Montoya, and they're running in a dungeon-like setting through, ups, downstairs, through a corridor, and then at one point Rugen turns and Inigo comes around a corner and whap, hits him with the dagger. That to me is more what we would be looking at, and less on maneuvers as a troop. All that being said, there are some limits to running in terms of you're not supposed to be able to map while you're running. So I play a theater of the mind anyway, and I would totally have something where I'd say, all right, you're running, you want to go left, you want to go right, and just be moving fast because they're running. I would play that up. It's not in the rules, but that's how I would play it. But ultimately, I think this is the other thing maybe I want to touch on, is we often get into, like, we're going to try to, and I've been guilty about this a bunch. I'm trying to get, it's really something if I was going to say I'm working on myself in terms of my approach to gaming, it's that I'm not going to try to fix every edge case from jump. If this kind of situation where your party decides to essentially kite enemies by running away, turning, firing, running away, or loosing, right, turning, missile weapons, turning, running away, doing that. If that becomes an endemic problem, then maybe you need to search for a solution. I've never seen parties engage with it. Certainly the games that I've run, folks have not engaged with it. It's dicey if your party's mixed and some folks are in melee and some folks are in missile. Telling your front rank folks who are in melee to run, given what happens, the penalties they get for running, not necessarily going to be like, oh yeah, I want to do that. There's, especially when, remember, keep in mind that most creatures are probably at least as fast as you are. So if you're running, given that what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and there's no separation between what the parties can do and what monsters can do, you're not outrunning a bunch of folks. If you're already in missile range and the monsters are the same speed as you, yeah, you might be able to maintain a distance. But if you have folks who are starting in melee and running, they're not going to be able to outpace the monsters. The monsters are going to be right up back on them in melee. And given that melee comes after movement, because in BX by the book it's staged, you all do one thing, then another. So it's movement and then melee. Well, you ran, they ran. Now, essentially, they're attacking you. You can't attack back because you ran away from them out of melee. And now they get a free attack on you. And by the way, it's at +2, whatever. And it's also, if you had a shield's negated. So not necessarily a great strategy. So because it's kind of an edge case, if you are not, and this I guess would be a general rule, right? You don't need to hunt edge cases. Just play the game. And then if something turns out to be or an endemic problem, then you can figure out a solution and come up with a hack and say, hey, if you run, like someone said, hey, I have in my game, if they're running away, then they can't do this, that, and the monsters can do this. Great. But I don't think you need to do that up front. See what happens. Because I think oftentimes players aren't going to do that either because they can already look at it and say, oh, this is a bad deal. Or even maybe it never occurs to them. You don't need to try to figure out everything up front. There are also more comments about, hey, using miniatures, and I think that the way that using miniatures has affected how people see the game, which I tend to agree with. I usually am theater of the mind, so it doesn't really affect me. I like to think of kind of melee as kind of just a probability cloud, as they're in there somewhere, but they're all moving around, kind of like in, I think about the classic Robin Hood, Errol Flynn movie. That melee in the at the end in the hall, you could look at it and say they're not really moving in the sense of movement, but just melee. They're just all around. They're always within kind of 30 feet of each other, so they're all sort of in melee, but they're all dancing around this space. I totally agree with that. There's a lot of good things in all these folks' comments. I think I just would say these are advanced topics. In these videos, all I'm trying to get folks, help them get to that beginner, just get them proficient with the rules. Then we can come back and say, okay, I've run into some problems. Here's what I got. I've run into just some ways I want to change the game. Because the other thing you can do, of course, with house ruling isn't just solve problems, but it's just to shade the game, give the game the kind of personality that you want to give it. Also great for that. And folks have mentioned, there's stuff in AD&D, the white box. Ian mentions sword and spells, which was, I think I have it here somewhere. It was kind of, it was another supplement to the white box, which basically was kind of a new chainmail. So if you went so you had chainmail, right? Then you have the white box, the 3 original books. Then you had Greyhawk and you had Blackmore. They kind of came back to swords and spells, which I think was kind of trying to, I guess, essentially be a new kind of like, okay, now you're going back to kind of mass combat rules, but sort of coming from kind of having the white box behind you as opposed to chainmail kind of pushing into it, if that makes sense. Let me see what the chat's got here. Game on Games has the melee flay that the wizard cast a wall of fire to immolate the foes. Well, that's true, but a couple of things, unfortunately, hard to do it because everyone's running. Remember, so in BX, you do everything in stages. Right, there's that checklist. Okay, you're doing initiative, great. But then it's like everybody moves, or it's like missile, movement, melee. Now magic is also in that kind of missile phase, but you haven't moved yet. So you'd have to try to plan it out. The other thing that comes into it, in terms of running away, is that there are. It's not a big rule. And where's my book? Hold on a second. It's not a big section, okay? They don't give a lot of detail, which is fine because I think it's fairly concise and well written to the point where you can get what they're saying. But in the section on running, which is on if you've got the basic book, it's on page B. No, sorry, it's on pursuit. Sorry, not on running. Pursuit B24. If either side wants to pursue the other, time is counted in rounds, and both sides are running. Monsters will chase evading characters only as long as the characters are in sight. So you go running around a corner, there's a good chance monsters aren't going to chase you. So this idea that, and again, right, this edge case of we're going to run and we're going to fire our missiles, you need to have like a long straight corridor. Because you turn a corner, enter a room, you do anything where you get out of line of sight, essentially, and the monsters are going to stop. Probably. You can roll some dice. I don't know. Do they say if it's 100%? They might not say at all. Let's see. Monsters will chase evading creatures only as long as the characters are in sight. Evading characters may be able to slow the pursuit by dropping things. So really, yeah, they just say they don't even make it a roll. In other editions, they might give you a roll. They might put some percentage on it, but by the book, which is what I'm interested in here, just by the book, you turn a corner, the monsters stop. And now that might open up some new strategies, which is get around corners and stop, which, maybe down the line you want to house rule that because that's too easy. Oh, they just run around a corner and the monsters stop. I would always say treat the intelligent monsters intelligently. If you do this once and you chase them and then they fire arrows at you, then the next time maybe you don't chase them. Maybe you try to do that same technique. But by the book, they're going to stop. So you got to have some long stretch of corridor which you can run down, do this whole shebang. So the amount of times you're going to run into that situation where that will match up with you is not going to be that much. I did look at B1, which unfortunately, since I'm on my phone, I can't share my screen. It actually does have some corridors like that. If you look at B1, was it In Search of the Unknown, and you look at the map, the upper level map has lots of long straight corridors in some spots. So actually, it might work there. But even then, think about like what are we doing? Are they destroying the game by doing this? No. Could they potentially, as they're running down corridors, end up into more trouble than they bargained for? Yes, especially if you do the, like some folks will do is say, if you're moving 120 feet or something, you could, or you're making enough noise, a wandering creature check. Certainly, if you're running madly down a corridor just for speed, then maybe a wandering creature check is in order. And then maybe what happens to the party when they're trying to have some folks run behind them or in front of them, and they've got folks behind them coming up. Easy way to get trapped and encircled. So I wouldn't fear that strategy. I'd like to see some players to really try that strategy, and even just doing it by the book, see what happens before I decide I need to overrule it because they don't know some kind of complicated, specialized Parthian shot technique. Like I said, I think it's a solution in search of a problem. It's a nice wrinkle. It's a little bit. It's like that theory crafting. Like at the beginning of the Producers. Have you ever seen the Producers, especially the classic one? At the beginning, Leo Bloom, the whole scheme comes about because Leo Bloom is basically theory crafting this thing about how you could potentially make money from a Broadway play failing, and the whole movie stems from him making this just theoretical, like, oh, what an interesting, just thought experiment, and then Bialystok, the kind of shady producer, then wants to turn that into a reality. This, I feel like, is a little bit of the same thing. Like, yeah, it's interesting. You could run, turn, shoot, but in the reality is, I don't actually think it's a problem. At least not yet. Show me it's a problem, and then we can do this. All right, let me see some comments here. I got some time left. Whoa, I got a lot. Let's see. Dave's here. Hey, Dave. Dave appreciates all the help with the hexes yesterday. Well, you're welcome. I'm glad I could do that. Michael Fraker asks, is there a type of book where they go through and list scenarios? Like when X happens, here's what you can do, and Y happens, here's what you can do. I don't think there is, Michael Fraker, and probably I don't think people would really want it, because I think ultimately, right, I don't know if to say the holy grail is that, especially like what people feel like, not necessarily this is how people felt back in the day, but I think the OSR ethos is really all about that there are no set things, right? That we don't need that list because our choices are not constrained. It's going to be totally up what the players do. If the party wants to do whatever, they can. But I guess maybe if you said more about what kind of scenarios you're looking for, like adventure scenarios, like, hey, if they decide to go with, because adventures will often at least list out for GMs, like, hey, if the party decides to side with the Duke, here's this kind of thing might happen. If they decide to side with the evil high priest, here's what might happen. If they decide to side with the druid faction, here's what they do. So that kind of stuff's listed. But I'm not sure, like, how general are you, or how specific are with those? What kind of scenarios are you speaking to? Dave says they have a hard time with things like action economies. Their old GM started with one move, one action. She's been doing that since the 90s. So I thought that's always how the game had been played. Yeah, and I think depending on what version you are, it's still kind of the way things are played. It's definitely one of those things like, I find this with board games, right? Maybe I'll use there's a board gaming analogy here. There are some games I like a lot. Wingspan is one. And with Wingspan, you have a lot of things. There's a lot of things going on in the game, but you only have, on any given turn, you kind of just have to choose one thing to do, which helps eliminate some of the analysis paralysis. Like, there might be a lot of stuff going on, but ultimately in this turn, instead of having to worry about, well, I could do 8 different things, like you got to do one thing. And even in Wingspan, right, that one thing, you have basically 3 or 4 choices on that one thing. So you just pick kind of one thing and you do that. So it helps mitigate the complexity. I think sometimes it's nice to start with that kind of approach. And that's kind of like when I was talking about the turns and time. I did it in a short, and I might have looked at the time. It's just saying, hey, one action takes a turn. It just simplifies everything. Once you start trying to divide everything into some kind of fractional whatever, it just gets difficult and complicated, and it for no real payoff. I don't think the actual time it takes in game. Oh, look at my watch. The time, not that important. The characters don't have access to that stuff anyway, so you can play a little loosey-goosey with the time part. Doesn't matter so much, but keep the mechanics going, at least is my point of view. Let's see, what else have we got? Sorry if I'm riveting as I'm scrolling through. Hey, Red Caps. Hey, Mikey the Goat Cat. Let's see. Red Cap says, if you're retreating, you increase your chances of dropping treasure or food or breaking line of sight, which may keep monsters from getting chased. Yes. If you're being chased and they can see you, right? Remember this. I'm looking at BX now. Other games, even the white box, might have something slightly different. If you're running, so let's say in Search of the Unknown, which again I wish I could post up here, has some really long straight hallways, and they're not even that long. I mean, some of them I'm looking at, they may be maybe about 60 feet before you hit a turn in the road, and of course monsters may be faster than you, right? So you're looking at it as a character, as a player for their character. We got to make 80 feet to get to this turn. We can break line of sight. So how do we buy that time? We need to get the monsters to stop running for a turn so we can gain ground and try to make that turn. So you drop. It's clever. It's very simple, but it's clever. If it's an animal or unintelligent monster, drop food or something edible or something they'd like to eat. Maybe for a rust monster, chasing you, maybe drop some metal, whatever, right? If it's intelligent, then drop loot. And then there's a chance they'll stop for the loot, and then that'll get you the gap they made. I think, let's see, according to Moldvay here, unintelligent monsters will stop to eat food half the time. Intelligent monsters will stop to pick up treasure half the time. And they also have a note of burning oil. Right here, another use for your oil. Use it defensively. Drop light oil behind you, and that will stop a lot of folks from pursuing. So you've got options to build up that distance. Hey, Gamer on Games, thanks for hanging out. Dave says, when playing Theater of the Mind, if a player says, I want to blank insert strategy, then I give them some kind of benefit of the strategy. Their plan doesn't have to be great. Yeah. I don't think that's a bad thing to do. I usually will try to walk them through whatever their strategy is, and sometimes it'll be obvious when I've had some players, I'm probably myself too, have a plan. It seems really good in our heads. When we speak it out, all of a sudden it seems less good. And then when someone repeats it back to us, it seems even less good. I think I've said this before, but I remember my party, they were looking at this hole, and the hole was maybe 30 or 40, 30, I don't know, not even that much, maybe 20 feet down. And they didn't want to jump, and there was nowhere to anchor some rope. I think they only had a couple of, they had some iron spikes, but I think they wanted to save them. So they didn't want to use it. So they're trying to figure out, they had this whole idea of, okay, we're going to use my 10-foot pole, and I'm going to bounce something else on that, and I'm going to bounce something else on that. And then they're kind of saying it out piecemeal. And at the end of it, I said, okay, let me get this straight. You're going to put your 10-foot pole in the hole. Then you're going to balance this thing on top of that. And you're going to balance this thing on top of that. And then you are going to get on top of that and try to shimmy down. And they looked at me and were like, no, we're not going to do that. And it was just that thought process. It's always good to get folks to read back, or ask someone, if you're saying something, ask them to make sure it's understood, or reply back with, especially something complicated, what it is. Hey, Brian Smith. Yep, I am live because I wanted to reply to a comment, but didn't want to record and then have to edit and stuff. So I thought and I wanted to kind of try out this vertical live deal. How do folks find this vertical live thing? Is it, for me, it's a little bit less than ideal. I can't share stuff on my computer. In this case, I'm at home. Maybe this would be more handy if I was out somewhere. I can't share stuff. Just from my point of view, I don't know how you guys think about the chat's kind of at the bottom, so it's a little bit awkward, and I not the most clear. Hey, Dave. Well, thanks for hanging out, but I wanted to kind of address it. and do that. I don't really have too much. Anyone have any other comments? It is like a FaceTime thing. Yeah. Is I mean I think that from a creator standpoint, what YouTube's trying to sell people on this, and again, my experience with YouTube and stuff isn't necessarily with other folks, is that you reach people who are in the vertical view, the folks who may be looking at shorts who aren't seeing the long stuff. I don't know. I just did it for me. It was like, oh, this seems like it might actually be convenient to do. So I might do this more when I have less time, because oftentimes what happens with the streams, and I guess I'm kind of done on what I really want to talk about, mostly want to talk about. So just for a minute, just my thought process is often when I'm canceling out, I cancel a stream. It's not because I have zero time in the day, but like today I had 40 or 50 minutes. When I realized, because I was working on something, I'm like, oh geez, it's now 1:10 and I have stuff I need to do at 2. So I don't want to stream my regular stream. But I do want to, I could do something. And maybe these kind of vertical streams will be what I will use them for, will be when I have some time, not a ton of time, not a formal stream, but I just want to be kind of informal about it. Maybe this will work for that, because there are lots of times I think like I could hop on for 20 minutes and just yak about something. But then I think, oh, do I want to do camera stuff and do all this stuff? I'm like, no, I don't really want to do that, or I don't, sometimes the editing can be kind of a pain. So sometimes I go, just not feeling the editing portion. But maybe this will work. But I did want to respond to Ian, aka Reverence Pavan's comment, because it was a good one and a long one, and I appreciate folks who want to interact, and I want to do that. But I just didn't feel like writing up a long response. I think sometimes it's easier to record than to write, so that's what I did. Back to OSE before I step off, because I do got a jet. If you guys got, if there are other cases, because I'd love to, for the folks, especially for the folks who are new to it, who haven't developed all the subsystems that they're adding in or importing from other games. If there's other stuff in the old school essentials or BX or whichever, generic OSR system, particular situations, quandaries, rule confusions that come up, I also will check in some of the forums where people tend to post these things. It's just with old school essentials, I think both because it's very popular and because, like I said, it's not a teaching edition. You get this intersection of people who are not knowledgeable in the rules generally, and certainly not in the kind of old school type rules or tradition. And then the fact that they just kind of handed this reference, and people are bouncing off it or having trouble. And I feel like, and that's why I made that cheat sheet, and that's why I did the video, and it's just to kind of help folks come to grips with it, just get more comfortable, get to that level where it's like, okay, I've played it a few times, I get it, and now I can go and add all this stuff in and do all that. I think that's about it. Yeah, I gotta jump off in moments anyway. I don't even know how to quit this thing. But folks, thanks for hanging out. Like I said, send me your questions, comments, things you would like me to check out, or rules you think I can help with, anything else of that kind. I've got a Discord. I didn't get a chance to set up description stuff, but I will add notes to this description if you find it later for stuff like Discord, forums, all that stuff. I'm on social media and all that, and it looked like some kind of UFO or bug flew behind me, but I could see it in my own reflection. It's a UA, what is it? A unidentified aerial UAP? Is that what they call them? Unidentified aerial thing? I don't know. Whatever it was. Anyhow, game on, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'll talk to you later. Bye now. Let's see if this